The Royal Caribbean blog just posted why cruise ships aren't built in the United States. We better call Sal. Hi, I'm the aforementioned Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. So, I had a viewer send me this on Twitter, and I thought it is worth a reaction video. And obviously, when we do a reaction video, it's better call Sal. So, let's take a look at this video. Let's watch it and see what Royal Caribbean says is the reason why cruise ships, mega cruise ships, are not built in the United States. And we're going to be surprised to find out that not everything they say is exactly accurate. If you're new to the channel, take a second, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's hear what Royal Caribbean and Mark have to say.
Have you ever wondered why cruise ships aren't built in the United States? Today, I've got to look at
Mark.
why all the cruise lines build their cruise ships overseas. Up next.
Nice logo.
Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and were you aware that modern cruise ships are not built at all in the United States? We've been talking a lot on this channel about Icon of the Seas, and before that it was Wonder of the Seas and Odyssey of the Seas, but no matter the
I talk a lot about their different cruise ships.
Cruise line out there, the mega ships of today are not built in the U.S., and a lot of people want to know, why is that? Is that intentional? Is there a good reason for it? And regardless if it's Royal Caribbean's newest mega ship, a super yacht for Silversea, or anything else in between.
Man, can I just be clear? Royal Caribbean ships are insane in their size. We're talking over 200,000 gross tons. Now, gross ton is an internal volume measurement. It's not a displacement measurement. But, I mean, these things are massive. I mean, 5,000, 6,000 passengers on board. You've got to wonder about the size of those vessels.
None of the major cruise lines build their ships in the U.S.
That's unfortunately
true. No matter if we're talking about a 6,000 passenger vessel, a 1,000 passenger vessel, big ships just aren't built in the U.S. for the cruise industry.
Now, we do see cruise ships being built in the cruise industry. Just did a video not too long ago on Viking starting a river cruise on the Mississippi. American Cruise Lines builds these vessels. These are small coastal vessels, inland and coastal vessels, but not the large mega ships.
Cruise ships are primarily built in shipyards in Europe, such as Meyerwerft in Germany or Chantier de l'Atlantique in France.
Now, those are the two yards that build Royal Caribbean vessels. And it's important to note why those two yards build them. There are about 3 yards. There's also Fincantieri in Italy.
All of Royal Caribbean ships have been built in one shipyard or another in Europe over the years. Other lines build their cruise ships elsewhere, including Europe, but the bottom line is no one builds cruise ships in the U.S., and I wanted to know why. So I asked Don Goldstein, who's a retired United States Coast Guard commander who has over 32 years of experience working with the cruise industry, why cruise ships are not built in the U.S. And
so Coast Guard, picking a Coast Guard commander is a good one to look at. Coast Guard is kind of the agency that regulates the U.S. Merchant Marine. I may have gone to the U.S. Shipbuilding Council, the Shipbuilding Association, to get some information. But, I mean, that's fine. You get someone who has a wealth of experience in shipping, and that's what he did.
As you probably guessed even before you ever hit play on this video, the main reason why cruise ships aren't built in the U.S. really comes down to cost. Now, there are
Okay, now he's going to hammer this point here about cost. Now, he wants you not to think cost is the important thing, but just listen to how many times he talks about cost here in the next minute.
There are a lot of reasons. There isn't just one, but in short, it just costs too much to build a cruise ship in the U.S. for a few reasons. I want to be clear on this, that there isn't just one reason, and it all isn't just cost, but
it is. I mean, it's the issue here about it. Cruise lines is a business. It is. And let's be clear, if you can build the ship cheaper somewhere else, that's where they're going to go. They have no loyalty here. They're going to go to wherever they can get the ship the cheapest. What's not mentioned in this blog entirely is the fact that China is right now embarking upon cruise ship production, and that has the potential to unseat the European and Japanese yards. Again, never mentioned in this Royal Caribbean video.
When you weigh all the factors, it basically means that cruise lines, including Royal Caribbean, build their ships elsewhere. So let's talk about...
Yes, and elsewhere, again, has to do with cost. And just to prove it, what's point number one you have for us, Matt?
What these reasons are. Number one is, of course, labor costs. Just like...
Again, this is it. It's all about cost. Now, let me be clear about his labor costs here. Just remember, where Royal Caribbean builds their ships is in France and Germany. Countries with basically similar standards of living as the United States. So you would think that the cost to pay for labor in France and Germany would be a wash. It should be the same. But pray tell, Matt, why is it not?
Like many other aspects of manufacturing, labor is cheaper overseas than it is in the U.S. The automotive industry is a prime example of why companies choose to build their products outside of the United States. Union labor in particular isn't cheap, and labor...
Okay, now we're banging on union labor right here. Let's be clear. Union labor is created to protect workers. This is the whole reason. I know people love to bash unions, and it's a great thing to do, especially in the shipping industry, but let's be clear. Union labor was essential in the creation of standards so that mariners and dockyard workers and shipyard workers had a standard of living that they could survive on. We're going to come back to that in a second.
Labor cost on a vessel as massive as a cruise ship can add up quickly. Cruise ship construction is a labor-intensive industry. And when you factor in the cost of American labor and the tax structures, well, it becomes unreasonably expensive.
So hang on a second. Again, he doesn't explain why it's cheaper to use labor in France and Germany. And it comes down to this, part of the European Union. And under the European Union, this conglomeration of 29 nations, labor can move between countries across borders without a problem. He talks about the car industry, and he talks about Mexico. Well, Mexico's standard of living is a lot cheaper than the United States standard of living. You could pay a Mexican worker a lot less than you pay an American worker. Well, guess what? In France and in Germany, you can bring in Turkish workers. You can bring in Macedonians. You can bring in Albanians. You can bring in Croatians, Slovenians, you name it, from throughout. And by the way, migrants that move into those countries can then move freely within the European Union. This is one of the things that caused Great Britain to Brexit. And it drives down the cost. So you're not paying it. Also, he never talks about the fact how these cruise ships are built. They're modular. They are built in pieces. And those pieces are assembled largely outside the yards. The hull and a lot of the machinery is built in the yard, but a lot of the rooms and areas are prefabricated way off the yard, brought into the yard, and then assembled. So it's not like they're building these things in Germany and France. They're built all over the place. And these modular constructions, the room you go in on a Royal Caribbean ship, or any cruise ship for that matter, is probably built somewhere off-site, put in, plug and played in, and able to go. Again, you kind of missed that in this video. I don't know why he wouldn't talk about that. Oh wait, it would go against the narrative he's trying to convey.
Like cars, though, cruise ships aren't built in places like Mexico. They're built in Europe. So how are these countries that have similar standards of living to the U.S. able to build ships more reasonably?
Okay, he never talks about the labor issue I just talked about, but he comes up with two other ones.
Well, it really boils down to the fact that they're heavily mechanized and are reconsidered strategic assets.
Hold on a second. So mechanized and strategic assets. So yeah, one of the things they do is consolidate. Shipyards build cruise ships, and that's all they build. And so they mechanize. They turn this into almost like an assembly line process. And like I said before, he doesn't go into detail about it, but a lot of those rooms and areas of the ships are built off-site. They're kind of prefab, thrown together, and then shipped. And a lot of them go into different ships. They're designed, the rooms are similar whether what cruise ship you're on, and a lot of designs for cruise ships are the same. The stacks may look different. There may be some different flares at the bow and the sterns, but basically they're very similar. And so they can basically prefab out cruise ships for these industries. The other thing they talk about here is strategic assets. This is national security features. France and Germany both agree that having this shipyard capacity, and more importantly, the prefabrication and fabrication of the ships in their nations, are a security issue. And they therefore devote assets to it. By assets, what do I mean? You tell me, Matt.
And in a lot of cases, the governments there help subsidize the shipbuilding industry because it's such a big deal.
Subsidies. Again, the government subsidizes. Chantier de l'Antique, where Bill's Royal Caribbean ships, is a state-owned yard by France. France owns the yard, which means that if you're a state-owned yard, you don't have to show profits. You don't have to show that you're making money. Germany puts money into Meyer Werft. And again, this created a huge amount of issue across the EU when Germany did this early in the 2000s. There was numerous cases where filing suits were against the EU about this. So again, they pile subsidies into this. And just remember that word subsidies, because it's going to come back later in the video.
Number two reason, material costs as well. The cost of materials that are used in construction of a cruise ship are going to cost more when it comes from the U.S., especially U.S. built and manufactured materials. As you may know, cruise ships are foreign flagged. In order to be U.S. flagged, which means the cruise ship is actually a U.S. flagged ship, most of the material, a majority of it, on a vessel must be from the U.S. So you can't build a cruise ship in the U.S. and import all of the cheaper materials from elsewhere around the world. The majority of it has to be coming from U.S. materials.
All right, Matt gets this completely wrong. This is 100% wrong. He's confusing issues here. All right. So, under the Passenger Vessel Service Act of 1886, if you want to operate in the coastwise trade, if you want to operate like Viking and American Cruise Lines in the coastwise trade of the United States, which means you're going just exclusively to U.S. ports, you're picking up passengers in one port and going to U.S. ports and going from point to point, then you have to be U.S. owned, U.S. flagged, U.S. built, U.S. operated. That's it. However, if you operate these ships like Royal Caribbean does, you sail out of Miami, you sail out of Los Angeles, and you go overseas. You go from Miami to the Caribbean. You can stop in Key West on the way back and come back in. You don't have to be U.S. built. Understand, there are U.S. flag vessels that are built overseas in the U.S. Merchant Marine today. There are numerous of them. They're involved in the international trade. He is confusing this issue. This is wrong. If you want to go from the west coast of the United States to Alaska, all you got to do is stop in Canada. This is what happened during COVID. When COVID hit, Canada stopped this. So he is confusing this entirely. He's making it sound like if you want to fly that U.S. flag off your ship, you have to be U.S. built. You don't. You can be built overseas. We saw this happen in the 1970s when Sealand and APL and a whole batch of large American companies started having their ships built overseas and operate in the international trade. Now, if you want to operate exclusively in the U.S. service, then you have to be U.S. built. But again, he confuses that throughout this video.
Number 3, regulations. Yep, just like the cost, this was probably the second reason you probably thought why cruise ships aren't built in the U.S. Building anything in the U.S. means more regulations by a variety of government entities. During the process, the United States Coast Guard and Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA, are just two of the agencies Commander Goldstein pointed to that would have oversight in the process, with others likely part of the process as well. Following World War II, the U.S. added strong protectionist legislation meant to preserve the maritime industry.
Okay, that's wrong, number one. We added legislation after World War I. We added the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. We added it with the 28 Act and also the 36 Act. But again, he doesn't go back to why that was done when we found ourselves short of vessels to sustain our national economy, including cruise ships, which we had to seize and impound from the Germans in 1917 to get the American Expeditionary Force across to Europe. 25% of the American Expeditionary Force was carried on 20 German and Austrian troop ships to get across. Again, he's playing this game with protectionism that's not accurate, and again, he's loose with his facts.
But it actually had the opposite effect. Many shipyards domestically closed, and the few that are left in the U.S. are focused primarily on military work that rely on government-paid contracts to ensure there is a profit in there.
Okay, hang on. There are other issues at play here. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I have a whole video that talks about the decline of the U.S. Merchant Marine. There are many factors that went into the decline of this industry. Open registries, the creation of the interstate highway and pipeline system, foreign competition out there. I mean, there's tons of issues out there. He makes it sound like it's just this solitary issue that's the cause, which a lot of people do, and I have a big problem with that.
An interesting op-ed in the LA Times from 2017 that argued
2017, let's find a recent op-ed, I guess. Let's go back 5 years and find an op-ed, but okay.
instead of protecting U.S. jobs, these protectionist laws actually ruined American cruises and cost American jobs.
I'm pretty sure I can guess who wrote the op-ed and where it was forward from. Probably, again, someone funded to talk about against American shipping. But anyway, he never identifies what it is, so I can't tell.
As an example, in 2001, there were Southern senators from the U.S. who wanted to arrange for U.S. taxpayers to subsidize a shipyard in Mississippi that could build a cruise.
Okay, hang on. So number one, he says, 2001, American taxpayers want to subsidize. Now, again, he just talked about subsidies were the key for building in France and Germany, excuse me. But again, now it's because it's in America. And oh, by the way, Mississippi. I don't know what he's got against Mississippi. I mean, Pascagoula Shipyard in Mississippi is a big shipyard. I'm not exactly sure why he has an issue with Pascagoula, but all right.
Tried, and it failed. Within a year, a bungled, half-completed hull was declared unfloatable and was towed across the Atlantic to be...
Wait a minute. You said it was unfloatable, and then it was towed. So was it floatable or not floatable? It's either floatable or not floatable. Obviously, it was floatable, so that statement was wrong.
Completed in Germany for Norwegian Cruise Line. According to Commander Goldstein, the only reason any cruise line would build a cruise ship in the U.S. would be to flag it here for coast-wise voyages like NCL's Pride of America.
That's the boat he's talking about. Can I be clear? I don't know why he makes this sound like it's two different things, but this is the Pride of America. This is the vessel that was started to build in Pascagoula. What happened was the ship owning company went bankrupt, and then the Maritime Administration, which I have a huge problem with in this case, didn't intervene in this. They didn't intervene at all. And so the shipyard was stuck with these uncompleted hulls. There was actually two of them. And eventually they get the Pride of America towed to Germany to finish. They give it a kind of a waiver so they can operate in the Hawaiian trade. Now, if you operate in the Hawaiian trade, you have to be under the Passenger Vessel Service Act. You have to be under the Passenger Vessel Service Act to operate in Hawaii. But again, he's convoluting the whole situation here, and I don't know why, because he's talking about the Pride of America.
By going that route, it brings into play a lot of regulatory protocols, such as U.S. materials and equipment, as we talked about earlier, U.S. shipyards, which are subject to U.S. labor laws, OSHA requirements, and Coast Guard inspection.
Okay, again, he's talking about the fact that U.S. shipyards are under OSHA, U.S. Coast Guard inspection, and I guess it's better to be in these other yards because there doesn't sound like there's any regulation at all in these other yards. I guess, hey, if you're Royal Caribbean, you want to build your ship where there's no regulations, hey, go overseas and go do it. There's also ABS, the American Bureau of Shipping. Yes, there are a lot of regulatory agencies that monitor U.S. shipyards for a good reason. This is something that is done to ensure there is safe working practices, but I guess, again, Royal Caribbean doesn't care about that because as long as the ship is cheaper, that's their bottom line here.
According to Commander Goldstein, most other countries don't have a regulatory agency like the U.S. Coast Guard. Instead, they let the classification societies do the majority of the inspection and certification work. And
so, real quick question then, why don't we do that in the United States? Why do we have OSHA and Coast Guard do this? Why not allow American Bureau of Shipping then to do it? This is something we need to talk about. Why not allow this to happen? I think it's an interesting discussion.
Some of them are very good, and some are not so careful about adherence to the international requirements. OSHA
By the way, Royal Caribbean, which one do you use? That'd be interesting to know right now.
rules designed to keep shipyard workers safe are expensive. To illustrate that point, let's also look at the Hyundai shipyard in South Korea in 1987.
Excuse me. 1987? We're going back 35 years for an example. Okay, let's head back to the time period of big hair. Heck, I had hair back then. Let's go back and see what he has to say.
In which a U.S. tanker was there to be inspected. Coast Guard had dispatched to oversee the significant work being done there that was required to be reviewed by the U.S. Coast Guard. Before the work was done overseas, the company that owned the vessel put the work up for bids both in the U.S. and overseas.
Real quick, 1987, this is in the height of the 600-ship Navy. This is a key period in U.S. shipbuilding because what happened was U.S. ship contracts, you shut down the public shipyards, the Navy yards that built ships previously in the past, and now all those Navy contracts went into private shipyards, and many of the private shipyards, because of the end of construction differential subsidies, which allowed you to get some subsidies to build U.S. flag ships to operate in the foreign trade, are gone now. So all those ships went overseas, and now to get repairs is almost impossible because the shipyards are full with Navy vessels. Again, something we missed in this discussion.
Korean shipyard won the bid even though when work on a U.S. flag tanker is done overseas, the vessel is brought back to the U.S. to work in the Jones Act trade. There's a 30% tariff applied to the cost of work overseas.
This is also a period of time when Korea was trying desperately to get a lot of American business, and they were building their yards, and again, they were undercutting a lot in the 1980s.
According to Goldstein, even with that tariff, I was told that the cost of the work at Hyundai was half what the cheapest bid was from a U.S. shipyard, end quote.
I'm kind of surprised he didn't use the example from 2022 of the APL President Wilson that went into a shipyard in Shanghai because it was cheaper, but also because they couldn't get repair facilities in the United States. And oh, by the way, the ship got stuck in the shipyard because the COVID lockdown happened. And now the ship that was supposed to be in there for 30 days was in there for almost half a year. Again, we kind of missed out on that. I guess that example wouldn't quite work here. But hey, you do what you do.
As you can see, the extra costs to build a cruise ship in the U.S. are substantially more than overseas, and it's part of the big reason why cruise lines choose to build their ships elsewhere. Then, of course, we got to talk about the fact that many cruise ships, in fact, all cruise ships, are foreign flagged.
Okay, again, this is where he gets this completely wrong. I can't tell you why he's wrong on this. Just because the ship is built overseas, it can be American flagged. Again, you look at the Merchant Marine today. There's about 180 vessels in the U.S. Merchant Marine today. There's about 100 of them in the Jones Act trade. These are ships over 1,000 gross tons. But the other, like 60 in the Maritime Security Program, a large majority of those are built overseas.
The U.S., they cannot be flagged as an American vessel. American shipyards are not equipped with experience building modern cruise ships, nor do they have the capacity or supply chain to assemble cruise ships.
Okay, let me be clear. I mean, we build nuclear aircraft carriers here. We build ballistic missile submarines. Again, most of these shipyards are assembly yards. What is lacking, I will say this, is that the size of these vessels are so big that the berths for them are hard to find. They're very difficult because these ships are so big. There's not that many in the U.S. You would have to fabricate one of them in the United States.
Cruise ships these days are almost all foreign flagged, with registrations in places like Panama, the Bahamas, Liberia, or elsewhere. And to register a ship with any country, by the way, and fly their flag, a company has to pay them a fee to join the ship registry. Besides,
yeah, how much is that registry for, I don't know, Liberia, Panama, some of these countries?
As the issues outlined earlier in this video, the costs for a ship registry in the U.S. are much higher than other countries. And of course, there's still one more reason that even if tomorrow, all of a sudden, some shipyard in the U.S. wanted to start building cruise ships, well, it's going to be very much an uphill battle. There are only a few shipyards in the entire world that specialize in cruise ship construction, and they really do dominate the market.
This is where China coming in is the big issue, because again, China is making a big play to take this away and shut down European yards. We saw it already with the failure of Genting and the shipyard up in Germany. Did a whole video on this. Now we're going to see it with challenges again, Chantier Atlantique and Meyer Werft up in Germany.
Most of the cruise ships that are built these days are in 4 yards, 1 in Japan or 3 in Europe, and it really boils down to, again, the cost and expertise involved. We talked about the costs already, but don't forget, because there are only a few yards that can build cruise ships, that expertise is pretty much locked up there. So if you're going to invest $1 billion with a B dollars into a brand new cruise ship, you're really going to want to make sure.
Notice how they build them in modules and float them out. That's a piece of the cruise ship right there. It's not the entire cruise ship, just a piece. You build them in assembly yards and then float them and assemble into one dry dock.
Sure, you have the best workers out there. The result is these 4 yards continue to dominate, and it's also why you're just not going to see many other yards building them. And because these yards cater to the cruise industry, their logistics chain is maximized to supply that niche.
Now, that is true. When you start building and you consolidate the yards, you do get an economy of scale. That is exactly true.
Thus, allowing them to be more competitive on pricing than, again, another kind of upstart yard, whether it's here in the U.S. or, frankly, anywhere else in the world. I also think it's important that while talking about the reasons why cruise ships are built outside the U.S., this isn't a video that's all about why maybe they should be built in the U.S. I have no problem with them being built overseas. Like any business out there, you want to make sure you're building your product at the right cost and also maintaining the right kind of quality that's out there.
Okay, hang on a second. Of course he's that. I mean, because again, Royal Caribbean, like any business, wants to buy a ship for the lowest cost. Let's go back to the flag issue for a second. The other reason they don't want to fly a U.S. flag, which they never mention in here, is you have to pay U.S. labor laws. Let's be clear about that. And once you put the American flag up, you got to pay $7.25 an hour minimum wage. And none of these companies want to do that. No one wants to pay that. The International Maritime Labor Organization basically just renegotiated new labor standards for mariners at sea and got it raised from about $640 a month up to about $650 a month. So, I mean, they're paying a little over $20 a day minimum wage for mariners. You can't do that when you're paying $7.25 an hour for America. That's the big thing about putting an American flag on it. Why is it there aren't more American engineers and deck officers on these vessels? We all know about Kate McHugh over at Celebrity Lines. I mean, she's a huge star, massive Instagram following, got a weird cat. She's got this like hairless cat. It's not I don't know. It's a weird looking cat. But anyway, Kate is very famous. But if you ask Kate and you ask other Americans, and I've known people who've gone work for the shipping for the cruise lines, they pay garbage for their entry-level officers and mates. And I mean substandard. You can get a lot more working as a barista at Starbucks than you could working on these vessels. And that's just not going to promote it because they want those foreign flags, those flags of conveniences, those open registries with less regulations, with less oversight to operate. And that's what Americans want, because Americans want to pay just a few $100 a day to go on a cruise ship. That's fine. But let's not focus on the fact is it's U.S. shipyards, because because basically what he said is, listen, you pay your laborer too much. You're too safe. There's too many regulations, and therefore we're going to go overseas, which is okay. Oh, and by the way, you don't subsidize your shipyards, so the taxpayers aren't paying for these people to take holidays. Okay, all right.
Whatever the reasons may have been many years ago that the U.S. has gotten away from shipbuilding, that's okay, because there's plenty of other options that are there. I'm very proud of what we do here in the United States. There's many aspects of this country that make it great.
Cruise ship building.
Building cruise ships doesn't need to be one of them, but I think it's important to understand why that is. I think you might be equally curious about it as much as just wanting to know the nitty gritty. Hopefully this video helped.
All right, well, that's my reaction to the Royal Caribbean blog. Again, is there elements that are exactly true? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always things. And, this is the Royal Caribbean's spin on why these ships are built in Germany and in France, which is fine. Again, I don't have a problem with that. But don't sit there and blame, first off, that it's the U.S. with subsidies and higher labor costs and higher safety costs, when you don't mention at all the fact that you're using a lot of subcontract labor to build your ships. You're using labor within the European Union that you don't have to pay minimum wage that you pay someone in France and Germany to. Don't tell me that, again, everything is equal. And oh, by the way, if you put the American flag on it, this happens when he's confusing coastwise sailing with international sailing. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hope you enjoyed today's reaction. Better Call Sal. If you did, take a moment. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment. I'm sure I'm going to get some comments here. Give it a thumbs up. Share it across social media. And if you can, support the page. How do you support the page? Well, you can do it one of two ways. You get the super thanks button below and give directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon. You'll see the link at the very end of the video here or in the show notes. You can become a patron of the channel with a monthly or yearly subscription. Until next video, this is Sal, signing off.